to both Kern County and the national environment to sort of look at quality of life and how these things impact us. We want to go a little bit deeper and explore the interconnections among these major forces and present some preliminary estimates of these relationships. We also want to provide a realistic forecast that can help us make informed decisions. We're not only academics, we are members of the community. Our families grow up here, our families are going to be raised here. Creating a suitable environment for growth, we suffer as well. So sort of the roadmap we're looking at, I'll be talking about quality of life trends, welfare, education, health. Dr. Michieka will be talking about air quality and population trends, and Dr. Evans will be talking about broader economic trends and will be presenting our estimates of the forecast. So I first want to talk about general welfare. And what we see some promising trends among teen births and infant mortality rates. We see that only 5.3% of adolescent women in Kern County are now giving birth, a reduction of 14.5% since 2006. Unfortunately, we are still nearly double the California average, but we're making significant progress. If we look at infant mortality rates have fallen precipitously since 2006 during a long-term recession and during a time of increasing child poverty. This speaks to the quality of care provided to Kern County residents. If there's significant poverty, if there's a recession where income is stagnating and infants are still surviving, the quality of care must be taking over. So that's a promising trend. Unfortunately, some of the less desirable trends do show up in the child poverty indicators. Almost a third of children in Kern County are classified below the federal poverty line. That's unfortunate. Now, we're down from the highs of 2011 and 2012, where more than 1/3 of children were in poverty, but we still haven't reduced to the levels of 2009. So there's still a lot of work to go. Perhaps an even more dire statistic is the percent of K through 12 students who get free or reduced price lunches. This has increased steadily since 2009, signifying that a lot of children are at poverty or near poverty. One of the foremost problems for childhood development, both physical and mental, is caloric inadequacy in not getting enough calories or not getting the right types of calories. So we still have significant strides that we need to meet to help the children who will develop Kern County's future. We estimate some preliminary findings, and we find that increased oil prices reduce childhood poverty and reduce the fraction of children who do receive free or reduced price lunches. These are sort of the top-down spillover effects from oil. Oil affects Kern's economy significantly. It affects everyone in Kern's economy, not just high income or middle income. It helps those who need employment or who get bonuses or higher incomes when oil is doing well. What we also find, unfortunately, is that a 10% increase in child poverty rates leads to a 5.7% increase in the children on free or reduced price lunches. Now, this is not necessarily a good finding. For every 10 children that are eligible, only about 6 take up the poverty programs that we've put in place for them. So are all eligible children receiving the nutrition they need to perform well in school? And preliminary evidence indicates no. One of the problems might be that perhaps eligible children are slipping from near poverty into poverty. So it's less bad than what could happen, but there are certainly downsides to this. Another force that could explain this is the so-called welfare stigma, where parents just don't want to enroll in welfare programs because they fear social ostracization, or they don't know about the programs. And it's unfortunate because it impacts the children. It doesn't impact the parents themselves, but it directly hurts the development of the children. Now I want to talk a little bit about educational attainment in Kern County. If we look, Kern County still has higher high school dropout rates than the California average. And if you plot the Kern County high school dropout rate against the West Texas Intermediate crude oil price, we notice a significant correlation. In fact, a year after oil prices increase, you start to notice high school dropout rates increasing in Kern County. One explanation is that as a 16-year-old male, you have 18-year-old friends who go into the oil fields. They go into the oil fields, earn $40,000, finance a $60,000 truck. What do you do as a 16-year-old male? You think, hey, this is a great life. I don't pay anything. I have no bills. I have no obligations. I can live off of $40,000 for the rest of my life. Unfortunately, what happens is we all know teen decision making is at best poor. So, children don't develop. They don't create their educational attainment that allows them to prosper in the long term. What happens when they want to buy their first house? What happens when they have their first child? What happens when their child goes to college? So again, educational attainment is important. We have to recognize we are an economy based on oil and agriculture. We will not see large amounts of people going to college, and we necessarily shouldn't. But we also should be cognizant of the fact that our children do respond to motives in the economy. So this is a second critical stage. The first critical stage is providing children enough calories. The second critical stage is trying to minimize the poor decisions by our teens. So we do notice a 10% increase in oil prices leads to a 3.6% increase in Kern's high school dropout rates and nearly a 1% decrease in the fraction of people who get their. So we do see that oil does have a significant influence on the children of Kern County. We also find significant evidence of intergenerational poverty. A 10% increase in the fraction of children born to adolescent mothers leads to a 28.2% increase in Kern's dropout rates. If my mother dropped out of high school, I am likely to drop out of high school. My kids are likely to drop out of high school. Their kids are likely to drop out of high school. We have to break this cycle. So we're going to skip past a few slides and talk about health. And in general, there are some very good things about the health of Kern County and some less desirable things. Notice that death rates in Kern County have fallen since 2005 by almost 20%. That's great. Unfortunately, one of the downsides is the number of citizens for each primary care physician. We are approaching one primary care physician for every 2,000 citizens in Kern County. Eventually, these death rates won't start dropping as fast. The quality of care is great, but if doctors are overburdened with patients, we just won't see this continued and sustained drop. We also notice that for specific causes of death, for nearly every category, heart disease, chronic lower respiratory disease, flu and pneumonia, Kern County is decreasing significantly. Homicide rates, Kern County is decreasing significantly. And sort of the one thing I is, again, focusing back on education. Education is the driver of many of the economic trends in Kern County. More education reduces death rates from heart disease, flu and pneumonia, and COPD, asthma, and emphysema. We need to attack the problem of Kern County's high school educational dropouts. Thank you, and let me present Dr. Nyakundi Michieka.
Ladies and gentlemen, so I'll just pick up from where Richard left off, and I'll talk a little bit about air quality. What I'll do in the first couple of minutes is define some of the terms that we use to talk about the progress that we've been making in Kern County in terms of achieving national standards for air quality, and then we'll move on to other issues. So the topography, when you look at the air quality in a region, there are a number of reasons or there are a number of factors that affect the air quality in a region. First is topography, second is the meteorological factors, and third is the human activity, industrial activity, how many cars, what people are doing, agricultural activity. So all those play a role in the air quality of a region. And if you look at Kern County and the Kern Valley, there are a lot of things that you could tell from that. So the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act was designed by Congress, and it required the EPA to come up with national ambient air quality standards that seek to protect public health and the environment, okay? And there are two types of standards. There are primary standards and there are secondary standards. The primary standards seek to protect public health. And, the individuals we're talking about are individuals who are at health high-risk individuals. And then the secondary standards seek to look at the environment and protect the crops, the soil, and so on and so forth, right? And California also has a Clean Air Act. The California Clean Air Act is more stringent, has more stringent regulations than the one that I just talked about. So now that we have these acts, how do we measure this? So I'll talk about air quality and I'll talk about measuring or monitoring air quality. When you look at a region such as San Joaquin Valley, you need to have places where you monitor the air, right? And the San Joaquin Valley has about 8 counties. Here in Kern County, we have about 9 air monitoring stations. Some as close as right here on Coffee Road, some on California. I think we have others at Bakersfield Municipal Airport, and so on and so forth. And these air monitoring zones, what they do is and if we have pollutants going above the national air quality standards, we have what is called an exceedance, right? So if you look at San Joaquin Valley, about 24,000 square miles, and you have 36 air monitoring zones, if one of those sites records an exceedance over a certain period, then that whole region is said to have reached non-attainment. Okay? So we seek to attain air quality, or we seek to meet attainment. When you meet attainment, then things are going well. But if you have a location in Bakersfield which has an exceedance, which is above national air quality standards, then the whole region is said to have reached non-attainment, even if the rest of the sites are, measuring standards that are within the limits. So these standards are again periodically reviewed and so on and so forth. So when you have issues like non-attainment, that comes with a host of factors. If you look at some of the slides here, you'll see that non-attainment first will affect health outcomes, right? If we're not reaching attainment, if we're not meeting attainment, health outcomes are affected. And then there's regulation of businesses and industry, which again affects industry location, because industries would not want to move to a place where there's a lot of regulation. So looking at our attainment or how far we've gone, you'll find that we've reached attainment in some areas, and in some areas we're working on that. And one of the areas we've seen attainment is in the ozone 1 hour standard. Okay, now there's ozone and there's particulate matter. Okay, ozone is formed when you have organic volatile compounds mixing, right? When you have the sun and these compounds mix, they form what is called ozone, and commonly referred to as smog. Then you have particulate matter, right? It could be particulate matter 10 or particulate matter 2.5. Particulate matter, think of a small particle whose diameter is about 2.5 micrometers. That's about 30 times smaller than a hair follicle, right? That's a small, really small particle. When it goes into your system, it stays in there, right? So those are two things that are, continuously monitored. So in terms of attainment and non-attainment, we've reached attainment in the ozone standard for ozone, and we're still, working on meeting attainment for ozone in the 8-hour standard and the particulate matter 2.5. So, we ran some preliminary estimates and found that increasing, right, a 10% increase in the days where the average ozone concentration is higher than the US standard is marked by a 4.7 increase in heart disease deaths. So these are preliminary statistics, and you can look at those and see how things have been going. So where have we reached? How far have we come? And we look at two areas. We look at San Joaquin Valley and East Kern. Now, the charts on the side, on the PowerPoints here, you'll find that there are two columns here. You have, there's what's going on in ozone, and there's what's going on in particulate matter 2.5. And you'll see that, we're looking at two regions, the 2002 to 2011, 2000 period, and then you have the 2011 to 2013 period. Those two periods, if you look at our progress, you'll find that, first of all, at least in ozone, you'll find that the number of days that were unhealthy have reduced from 10 to 1, right, comparing those two regions. Looking at the good days, you'll find that the good days have increased from 49% to 58%. Here we're talking about percent days, not 49 days, but between 2000 and 2002, 49% of the days the weather was good. So then looking at East Kern, we have similar properties. If you look at the section which says unhealthy for sensitive groups, you'll find that we've moved from 16% to 6%, which is progress. And if you look right at the top column where there's good, you'll find that we've gone from 58 to 69. So there's progress. So we're moving in the correct direction. So the next section I'll talk about is I'll talk a little bit about demographics and national business cycle, and I'll let Mark touch on agriculture and the petroleum sector. So population. Kern County's population. Kern County's population, you'll find that about 60% of the individuals who live in Kern County are between the age of 18 and 64 years, right? Then the second largest group are those who are between the age of 5 and 17, and that's about, a fifth of the population, or 20%. And those numbers are very similar to what's going on in California as a whole. In terms of ethnic groups, you'll find that Kern County, 50.9% of the individuals in Kern County are Hispanic or Latino, and 36.9% are white, while the black, Asian, and 2 or more races are about, below 10. But those numbers change when you look at California as a whole. You find that the Hispanic and Latino ethnic group is, in terms of racial composition, is the same as the white and not Hispanic group. And you'll find that you have the Asian population is more in California. So you can find some similarities in these two regions. So if you look at California, there are 38.8 million people, right? Kern County, how many people do we have? Well, estimates, around 2014, we found that there were 300 individuals in Kern County, a population which has been growing at an average of 1% over the last 5 years, okay? So population is growing, and when you think of population, what affects population? Population growth, right? You think of births, you can think of deaths, you can think of migration, right? Immigration, like Richard and I moved into Kern County. So those parameters affect population growth. Overall, population is growing. There's an increase in population, but there's also something I'd like you guys to look at. If you look at the second last column, there's there's a row that talks about domestic migration, and you'll find that between 2010 to 2011, and you keep going to 2014, you'll find that a lot more people are leaving Kern County and moving to other places. Overall, population has been growing. Now, when population grows, what does that mean, right? And there are two ways of looking at that. If I move into Kern County and I get married and I get a family and my family grows, then the demand for housing will increase if me and many of my friends decide to do that, right? And that will drive the construction industry. Another thing that you can think about is if a lot of skilled labor comes into Kern County, then industries will find this area attractive and will not move away from that. So population has its merits in terms of keeping industries within here and driving the economy. But then there's another side to it. When you have excess labor supply, right, compared to labor demand, then you have a lot of people who want to work, right? Labor supply is large, and the labor demand is less. So you may have an employment problem, okay? And overall, also the wages. If you think of wages, if there are 10 or 15 engineers who can do the same thing that I do, then our wages would probably not, will be a very competitive industry to work in. And, there are other things that you can think of or look at in terms of living standards and crowding and so on and so forth. So I'll go back to migration. We talked about migration, ladies and gentlemen. And if we look at these two regions, I have a chart there showing what was happening between 2001 to 2007, and then what was happening between 2007 to 2014, okay? 2 chunks of time. Between the first 7 years, we had a lot more people moving into Kern County, right? And, this is this is something which standard of living here was lower. A lot of people were coming in, but looking at the more recent years, 2011, 2014, we had more people moving out and leaving. So that's something. So we asked ourselves, which people are these? Who are these people who are moving, who are leaving? And one of the things we started by looking at the number of households who are receiving food stamps or the SNAP program. What is the SNAP participation rate in Kern County and in California? And you'll find that the first 7 years we had the population that was on SNAP benefits was double, but in the latter years the gap was less. Then we also looked at the individuals who are we looked at the employment rate and the people who are employed here. So when we think of this, the first thing you want to think about is the labor force, and then you have the employed people and the unemployed people, and then you also have some folks who are non-covered employment. One of my students came to me and said, "Sir, how you doing?" I said, "I'm doing good, man." And he said, "You know what? I'm starting my own company, and I'm having fun." I asked him, "What are you doing?" He said, "I have a lawn mowing service company." I said, "Good, good. How many people are you employing?" He said, "Well, right now, but it's just me." I said, "Good, okay." And with time, I'll have other people working with me, and this group of individuals, are the non-covered employment, and they're not covered under government statistics. So we find that they tend to move to other parts when conditions are favorable in other parts of the state. So finally, I'll just talk about projection. We're at 872,000 people, but the California Department of Finance, at a growth rate of 2%, finds that we'll reach the 1 million mark in 2020. So, that's using a growth rate of 2%, but if you use a growth rate of 1%, you'll find that the population, will be about 973,000. So I'll stop here and I'll let Mark take over. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.
And that difference shown on the slide, it's a difference of about 116,000 people in that year. So one of the things we think is important that I think the Department of Finance is still hasn't quite caught up yet is I think our population growth has slowed, and as you make long-term plans, I think it's important that you take that into consideration. I'm going to present a little bit of a picture of what we think is going to happen in 2015. And we're doing this in the spirit of Emerson, who said something to the effect that he never made any mistakes, he just learned 10,000 things that didn't work. And I think that's like forecasting. I think the benefit of forecasting is not so much the forecast, that's what you folks are interested in, and we appreciate it. But for the forecasters, it's a learning experience. You figure out what went wrong with your forecasts, and then you learn from that by trying to figure it out, why things went haywire. One of the a big part of the wind in the sail of every local economy's business cycle is what's happening nationally, and for that reason, the speaker we have later this morning is an eminent Wells Fargo economist who's going to be presenting the national picture. What we did here is we just looked at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia's consensus forecast. They survey all the forecasters and ask them what they think's going to happen. Sarah will present more detail later, but the big picture is the growth rate of real GDP should be higher over the next 2 years than it has been the past 2 years. Payroll growth will continue to be very strong nationally in 2015, over 250,000 new people on payrolls per month. It will slow somewhat in 2016, but it'll still be a healthy. This continued national expansion will help us locally. It is part of our picture. And it's what this slide shows, the picture here that's being painted is really this increasing national momentum is hitting an economy that really did pretty well in 2014. The employment rate, despite what happened in agriculture, was 1.5% increase. our unemployment, number of people unemployed continued to decline by more than 11% per year, and the unemployment rate fell by almost a point and a half. So what we need to do is adjust this momentum that's really a pretty healthy clip for what's happening in agriculture and what's happening in oil. So to try to get a handle on agriculture, what we did is we started with a big UC Davis study that was released in July that estimated the impacts of the drought throughout the state. And they disaggregated for the Tulare Basin, which is Kern County, Kings, Tulare, and Fresno. So our approach here is going to be to look at what UC Davis says is going to happen for this 4-county region and then try to disaggregate which part of it is Kern County. This is just a picture of the continued trend from row crops to permanent crops. We are obviously going to give something back this year. I think the big picture on this slide is we've done so well in agriculture over the last 3 or more years that fortunately we have created some growth that we can give back a little bit of it, and this is a much better situation than had we been in a period of stagnation and then we get hit with the drought. Crop revenues, almost $7 billion, 60,000 jobs in agriculture. What shocked me is that agricultural jobs, the EDD recently revised their estimates, and they show ag jobs actually increasing about 1.8% last year. I did not expect that. So what UC Davis does is they start with what the impact of surface water reductions, likely increased groundwater, tapping of the groundwater, the net water loss, pumping increases, and then they regionalize these effects. Generally, what's happening is in the southern valley here, UC Davis projects a loss of about 133,000 acres, 61% of it cotton and grains, about 18% feed crops, and about 18% fruit and nut trees. So fruit and nut trees, maybe 18% of the lost acreage, but notice it's about 50% of the lost revenue that's projected. Cotton, I believe that was 60% on the last slide of lost acreage. It's only about 1/3 of the lost revenues. So you can see why the acreage is going where it's going. The acreage is following the money. Now, if we disaggregate this, we find that probably the revenue loss for crops and dairies is going to be about $135 million. It's a lot of money, but remember from a previous slide that this is a $6.7 billion industry. If we now add in the indirect and multiplier effects, looks to us like it's around a $284,000 or $285,000 hit in terms of revenues. Now, what I'm unsure of, I'm pretty sure that what's reflected here is just a revenue loss, and based on other parts of the study, I suspect it's about another $100 million hit or so from the owners of the farms because of increased water costs. If we translate this into jobs and income, I think the big picture is that this represents about 2% of the jobs and labor income in the farm sector. The aggregate impact is more like about 0.5% of the jobs and income for the total economy. So we think this is about 0.5% hit in terms of jobs and income. As I mentioned, we haven't really seen this job impact in 2014, so if it if it comes, we can't really explain that. That would, I guess, be the magnitude of it in 2015, maybe a delayed effect. Now, in the mining, oil, and gas sector, oil and gas is the lion's share of mining. What you see here is that this sector has also been doing very well, as we know, but notice that the slowdown actually started in 2013, where the GDP generated in the mining sector decreased about 15%, and jobs fell about 2%. Did claw back a little bit last year. Now, here our approach is going to be to look at past historical episodes of price declines, and then to try to get a feel for when prices declined by a certain amount, how much did jobs decrease in the mining sector, and how much did income decrease. So the episodes we picked were 1986 and 1998, where you'll see price declines of 39 to 46%, and job effects in the mining industry and earnings effects about half of that. So we think that the elasticity is about 0.5. In other words, if oil prices decline 10%, we'd expect about a 5% decline in jobs, about a 5% decline in income for a major episode, not necessarily for little movements of 5% or 10%. So what we have to do is, and I'll leave this to Gene later, we have no clue what's going to happen to the price, but we picked prices here locally average $90 a barrel in 2014. We're using 55. If we use 55 for an average for the year, what we find here is that's about a 40% decrease in price this year, so we'd expect about a 20% decrease within the mining sector itself in jobs and in labor earnings. Oh, let me go back a little bit. Big picture. Big picture is that this is about 20% of the jobs and earnings in the mining sector. It's about 1 to 1.5% of the jobs and income for the economy as a whole. So for the economy as a whole, we think it's about a 1.2% hit in terms of employment, about a 1.4% hit in terms of labor earnings. Putting it all together, the main elements of our forecast is that because of the population growth slowdown, we're projecting labor force, and this is an important ingredient of our unemployment forecast, will increase at a pretty small rate, 0.3%. We saw that underlying pretty strong momentum in the non-agricultural sector. I slipped over that slide, but non-agricultural employment, covered employment actually increased 2.6% last year. So we think it'll slow down, but it'll still be positive. This non-covered sector that Nyakundi talked about, that's been declining 5-8% a year or so, we expect some continued out-migration that will lower that employment. We toss in 7,000 job losses, which are the sum of those drought and oil price impacts plus a multiplier effect. And what we end up with is basically pretty much stagnant income growth per person, very small income growth. We think the number of people employed will decline by a little less than 1%. At the end of the year, we'll be at about 350,000, 349.9. I think the number of unemployed will increase about 10%. The unemployment rate will go up a bit. Basically what's happening here, the big picture is that it looks to us like 2015 equals 2013. In other words, we grew from 2013 to 2014. We think the decline in 2015 is going to be very close to the same magnitude as the growth was in 2014. You'll notice that the unemployment rate rests about the same rate, number of people unemployed. In closing, as I mentioned, forecasting is a learning activity. Economic analysis is a learning activity. This is a good reminder that really what we do here for a living, what we do for the nation, it's all risky stuff. We don't have industries here that grow at a constant 2% a year. That's it. And then I think we need to remind ourselves that what we do for the nation really is essential for the whole nation, whether they understand that or not, whether they appreciate it or not. So we know our contribution, and we're proud of it. Thank you.